Okay, so it's very good to know that it's being recorded, because this is a very, very, very important webinar on the pushback against the Istanbul Convention. And we have a terrific setup. I think it's absolutely the best people we could possibly have around here. So we have Dubravka Simonovic and Ferid Achar, who both have been working for a long time in trying to make the world pay attention to domestic violence and violence against women, and to do that in effective ways and in ways that really abolish gender inequality and challenge patriarchy all over the world. So Dubravka Simonovic is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. And she has been the chair of the CEDAW committee at the United Nations, and also been part of the setup of the Istanbul Convention at the Council of Europe. So those are the two major international organizations that have been doing work on violence against women. Frida Achar has also been the chair of the committee, of the CEDAW committee at the United Nations, and been involved in the making of the Istanbul Convention. And she's the former president. That's really quite recent that you stopped being the president, right? Yeah. Of the group of experts of action on violence against women and domestic violence of the Council of Europe. This is the group Grevio that monitors what happens with the Istanbul Convention. And it's good that they monitor, because it doesn't go always according to plan. And it's an ongoing political struggle to make such a convention successful. And unfortunately, there's quite some pushback against this convention. And this is why we have this webinar today. And in the first part, for the first hour, we're gonna reflect on the convention and its merits, and why is it so revolutionary? Why is it challenged? How is it challenged? And what can we do about that? And then after a short break, we will get back again for a next hour with Conny Roggeband and Andrea Krizsan, that you are also seeing at the moment. And they're finishing a book on the pushback against the Istanbul Convention. So they have been studying very rigorously what happens there, and they can provide all the knowledge that we would possibly need to further engage in action to try and make coming to an end of this violence against women, I think. So for Ferida Achar and Dubravka Simonovic, my first question will be the same question, which is for those of the people who are watching us now who are not exactly knowledgeable about this convention. What is so new and special and innovative or revolutionary about the Istanbul Convention? Ferida, can I give you the floor first? And be short, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. It is a pleasure to be here and in the company of such knowledgeable people too. I also would like to congratulate at this moment both Andrea and Conny for this wonderful book that they are coming out with, which you will be discussing in the latter part of this webinar. Now, in response to your question, of course, Dubravka and myself, we have both been very much involved in the making of the Istanbul Convention from day one, so to speak. We were both members of the task force convened at the Council of Europe to look at the phenomenon of violence against women throughout Europe and come up with some suggestions about what needs to be done. And we I'm simplifying, of course, the whole thing. And we did that. Our first recommendation at the end of an extensive study and campaign was that Europe needs a legally binding convention on violence against women. And this is what eventually emerged, what eventually became what we call the Istanbul Convention today. Now, in answer to your question, what is so innovative about this? What is so special about the Istanbul Convention? I would say it is really special because it puts together three very fundamental concepts and links them together. And those are gender equality, discrimination on the basis, discrimination on the basis of gender and violence against women, gender-based violence against women. Now, these three concepts were not unknown to people before the Istanbul Convention. There was, of course, a lot of academic and other work going on. And some of those have been taken up by international norms in other contexts, CEDAW Convention being the first and foremost of a convention that worked, that is there for women's rights and for equality between women and men. But what the Istanbul Convention did is link these three concepts together. It said, basically, Istanbul Convention says it is gender equality, gender inequality that leads to discrimination against women. And it is the discrimination against women that reflects itself in its most extreme form as violence against women, as gender-based violence against women. So it's this link that is clearly established and, mind you, in a legally binding document. So it's not a wish list, it is a kind of an obligations list for states. So this is one thing that is very, very special about the Istanbul Convention. Another thing that's very special about the Istanbul Convention is that it's both, as I said, theoretically sound, it sits on this theoretical basis, but it's also very practical. It literally gives, it's like a recipe, I sometimes say, like the doctor's kind of also instructions to patients about what to do on each aspect. And it specifies what needs to be done in terms of prevention, in terms of protection, in terms of prosecution, and the integrated policies. And I think at this stage, perhaps Dubravka will pick up and talk about it. And later on, if I have some time, I'll elaborate on those too.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Dubravka, you can take over and see whether you agree, whether you want to, what you want to add, please. Muted.
So let me start by thanking you for inviting me to participate at this important webinar on pushback against the Istanbul Convention as United Nations Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. And as was mentioned by Farida, we both participated at the level of UN side within implementation of CEDAW Convention and later on in elaboration of the Istanbul Convention. So what is new? I fully agree what was stated by Farida, but would like to be maybe more practical, because at the UN CEDAW level, in CEDAW Convention, we have only 16 articles that were later on interpreted by CEDAW committee, and violence against women is addressed through general recommendations. So what was stated by Farida, that Istanbul Convention is more precise, is very correct, because we have definitions, very clear definitions, what is violence against women, what is gender-based violence, what is due diligence, what is in prevention side, what is in protection side, what is in prosecution side. So collection of data, cooperation with non-governmental organizations, parliamentary oversight of implementation of the convention. So it's much stronger in terms of monitoring of what is done in terms of implementation by ratifying states. So in that sense, with 84 articles, this convention is very detailed. And now, whenever I'm going to different countries and using CEDAW Convention, I am pulling out articles of Istanbul Convention as precise articles that are explaining what is in CEDAW Convention, because CEDAW Convention is more general, starting from elimination of discrimination against women, but seeing violence against women as a form of discrimination against women, and Istanbul Convention is starting from violence against women and then looking into details how it should be eliminated and prevented. So for that reason, Istanbul Convention is really now providing additional value also at the global level. And now when we are discussing what is needed at the global level, many states, not many, few states are now mentioning universalization of Istanbul Convention. And this is something what is needed.
Thank you. I think this is a very concise and wonderful defense of the Istanbul Convention, and I would urge all the participants that have never looked at it to actually read it and see that it is really true what both of you are saying. I think I would agree with both the innovativeness of this convention and its practicality and its wide range of covering not just what should happen once there is violence, but also all sorts of measures you can take to prevent it. So, but given that it's such a wonderful convention, and even countries outside of the Council of Europe are thinking that they might borrow from it or take it on board, elements of it also, why do you think it is challenged? I think, Dubravka, you can just continue and
Yes, so if you look at a global context, there is advancement, but there are also pushbacks. And those pushbacks are not only against the Istanbul Convention, there are pushbacks that would be called anti-gender movement. Because in other parts of the world, we are seeing same arguments used against different changes related to improvements of law. There is movement against gender at the UN level. Many delegations are now opposing using term gender. They are preferring women and men, and equality between women and men, but not gender equality. Also at the OSCE, we are seeing some countries, recently Kazakhstan, they are changing gender equality legislation to put it women and men, equal rights and so on. So we are seeing the whole movement against gender. But if we look what is behind that, I think that behind everything, and this was a surprise for me when this term was challenged in Croatia, there are different national contexts, but term gender was not really fully explained. And on the other hand, when it was used, for example, CEDAW Convention, when it was used, it was not really at the level of general education for general population. So many persons did not know what is the meaning of term gender equality, gender-based violence against women, and so on. And now with clear definitions that were provided in Istanbul Convention, including definition of gender, then suddenly those conservative forces, they started to use this term in order to put in this term misinterpretation of what is behind the whole issue of gender-based violence against women. For example, UN Declaration on the Elimination of Violence Against Women, adopted in 1993, is defining violence against women as any act of gender-based violence against women. But this was not really properly translated into national languages. It was used at international level, not at the national level. So somehow now what happened was that those conservative forces that are in general against gender equality, equal rights of women and men, elimination of violence against women, they have suddenly used all those issues related to gender misinterpretation in order to send messages that are not really in line what is the substance of Istanbul Convention. So I think that Feride could add more, but for example, it was clear misinterpretation that Istanbul Convention and concepts of gender will ruin families and so on, what is really not there. Okay.
Yeah, so Dubravka points at somehow missing communication or missing knowledge transfer about gender as one of the reasons that it is challenged. Feride, would you agree with that? Would you?
Yes, I would agree with it in terms of its, I mean, that's how it reflects itself. This is true that it's misinterpreted, and I agree with everything that Dubravka said, but I think it goes beyond that, and it's more than that. I think the challenge is really the challenge. I mean, Istanbul Convention is challenged because the Istanbul Convention challenges the status quo. It challenges the way things are, which is, it challenges patriarchy. And this is why all this misinterpretation is, I think, deliberately read into the Istanbul Convention. It is not a simple, I don't believe now that looking at the way crossed by these challenging movements, I do no longer think that it's only a misunderstanding. It's a deliberate misunderstanding that tries to make the Istanbul Convention the target of attacks, and which are actually directed to much wider concepts. It is in many societies, like in mine, for instance, I come from Turkey. I mean, nobody can actually come out and say that they are okay with violence against women. Everybody is against violence against women. But when you link it to gender equality, and when you link it to discrimination against women, those a lot of people are less clear about where they stay with those. And that's why when Istanbul Convention points to the very cause of the issue, then it becomes the target of all this attacks. That would be my addition to what Dubravka said.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is an addition, but in a way also you seem to also challenge what she was saying, in that it seems to imply, the way you explain it, that there is no way you could have, through a better way of communicating what gender is or gender inequality is, there's no way you would have been able to prevent these political different opinions on whether gender inequality is something that we actually would like to end, or whether maybe some people have some privileges based on that they would like to keep. And no?
Maybe I was not clear, because I fully agree with Farida. But what was my point is that even if you look at the CEDAW Convention, there was no sufficient education at the national level. What is main content of the CEDAW Convention? What is required at the national level to implement those ideas on elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and inclusion of principle of equality between women and men, gender equality in constitutions and national laws. There was no education about jurisprudence of CEDAW committee with respect to different cases related to violence against women. And for that reason, general population was easy to kind of lead in direction of listening all those misinterpretation related to gender and content of Istanbul Convention. And this is something what surprised me in my country, in Croatia, when I saw young boys and girls standing at the main square protesting against the Istanbul Convention. I was really surprised, because we had a huge progress from Beijing conference in '95 until that moment, and then it was suddenly clear that no one knew what is gender. They didn't know what is in Istanbul Convention. Content was misinterpreted through media and so on. So it was really not easy then to go back to starting point with explanations what is in Istanbul Convention and to have ratification. At the end it was ratified, but it was really not an easy process.
Yeah. I think you clearly say that you agree, the two of you, and to some extent I can see that you do, but there is also like a different accent that you put on this, I think. And we can maybe come back to that in the general discussion at the end. If you look at the attacks that are currently in place, especially at the international level also, can you say something about that? What kind of, what's the nature of these attacks? Because I think also just as many participants here might not have read the whole Istanbul Convention text, maybe they're also not all knowledgeable about what exactly is this pushback, and what do we mean if we say there are attacks against it? So you can take the examples from the international level, or also you can take them from your own country or any other national context that you might know about. So
are you asking me? Who are you?
Yes.
Okay. Now, the attacks at the different countries have a surprisingly common kind of actually approach, and surprisingly, to me, it was surprising at the very beginning, a surprisingly shared point of origin in a way. Many of them originate from groups that ally themselves somehow, wrongly or rightly or correctly or incorrectly, to religious entities. Organized religions, but they're very different religions. I mean, it's the Catholic Church in one place, it's the Orthodox Church in another place, and it is Islam in another country. So it is related. I mean, there is this kind of difference, yet meeting of the minds on another level. Also, as Dubravka already mentioned, these attacks are mostly concentrated or are coming from arguments that say that this convention this will destroy the family institution, that it will, and to use the language that is used by these people in my country, for instance, that it will encourage homosexuality. Now, these are to a large extent, I mean, they're obviously totally unfounded as far as the Istanbul Convention is concerned, and but they are the kinds of arguments that resonate with a lot of people. They come from conservative basis, or what claims to be conservatism, religious conservatism, or sometimes what claims to be nationalism, for heaven's sake. You know, there are people who are also these groups that are against the Istanbul Convention because they think it imposes these values, or these foreign values, on local cultures, populations. And so these are all common characteristics, I think, of the response that these challenges that are seen in many different countries, but they somehow converge on these two issues, the family issue and the LGBT rights. And they are totally unfounded because, I mean, my personal opinion is that, first of all, family is not, as Dubravka also said, Istanbul Convention is not about the family. It is only about violence. And so within the family context, if anything, families without violence are stronger families. So that should be, you know, it should be for that. And again, my personally speaking, I would not say that there is anything in the Istanbul Convention that really carries the LGBT agenda to a further point than where it actually is. So that is something, another unfounded argument, I think.
Yeah, I think so. So what you're saying is it's part of a larger effort. There's commonalities between attacks in very different places. Dubravka.
Yes, at the global level, we can see this pushback movement, and United Nations Secretary General in his statements few times mentioned pushback movements against women's rights. And it's not only against gender equality, gender-based violence, it's also against reproductive rights of women. So now we are seeing that resolutions that were adopted before are now blocked by different delegations. The same language is blocked now. We do not have support for terminology that was used up to now normally. And this is all in this pushback package. And we are seeing this in Latin American part of the world, in Africa, we are seeing this in Europe, in Eastern Europe. So we are seeing this around the world, and they're using the same type of arguments that were mentioned by Farida. So what was mentioned against different parts of the Istanbul Convention is used in different parts of the world against this terminology. So they are challenging changes of constitution, changes of legal norms, and so on. So this is the whole movement. And then Secretary General called for pushback against pushbacks. And my mandate jointly with other 6 mandates, it was 7 of us. And at that time, Farida was also president of Gravia. So from UN, it was CEDAW committee, my mandate and working group on discriminatory laws. Then from regional mechanism, it was Mesekri following Belém do Pará, Gravia following Istanbul Convention, and 2 special rapporteurs from Inter-American and African system. We jointly issued a statement that we are independent women's human rights mechanism to pushbacks, because we are not sufficiently used and integrated in everything that is done by the UN system. So we are seeing huge implementation gap with respect to all human rights instruments related to women's rights. So we need to be better supported by the whole system, and we need better implementation of those norms that are already there in order to stop this pushback movement, because without this we are going back to the points that we are discussing again from the beginning, from the scratches, everything. We are not really using what we have.
Yeah, so that's quite serious. No, I think if I add up the two angles that you presented, Viride and you, Dubravka, then not only is there seems to be a common point of origin in the way the Istanbul Convention is attacked, but also those attacks are not limited to the Istanbul Convention, but are expanding over other issues connected to women's rights or gender equality. I think also to sexual equality, actually, right? So in that sense, it's clearly not an isolated pushback against this one convention. It seems to, if not coordinated, sounds a bit like a conspiracy. That's maybe not what we should think, but there is more than just random attacks on it, that's for sure. And there is also, this is part of a wider political project that seems to combine all sorts of conservative and nationalist and maybe other elements in order to prevent further progress to gender equality. And so this is quite serious. In the international field of violence against women and women's rights, what do these attacks do to the whole field? Dubravka has already said, like at the UN, I mean, there is a kind of mobilization against the pushbacks. You called for making those stronger and for more support from more relevant organizations for this. But what's the impact of these attacks? Dubravka, you're on my screen, so I think you can
a little bit more. Situation with respect to violence against women is really challenging, because if we look at for example, CSW is main intergovernmental body dealing with women's rights, gender equality, following
the status of women, not from the United Nations. Yeah.
Yes. But CSW is not having violence against women as standing agenda item. It's not examining violence against women each year, only every 6 years. So it is really not good in a situation like this. I think that we need to reform the CSW as Commission on Human Rights was reformed years before into Human Rights Council, because CSW is promotional commission. It's not really commission that is looking into implementation side. And now we really need to look into implementation. We need to see results. We need to have good data, and focusing also on femicide data, femicide watch initiative and so on. And this is not there. So also mechanisms like those independent mechanisms are not fully integrated in the system. So there are many things that should be now connected better. It is something that is needed, and I am not seeing women's movements supporting all of this. Now everything is kind of disconnected. So we need better connections. We need movements. I was even calling for 5th World Women's Conference on Violence Against Women, but nothing is happening. And now we have Corona, and Corona is additionally stopping things. This is intersection between gender-based violence against women as pandemic and pandemic of coronavirus, with lockdowns that are negatively affecting women's rights in general. So we are really in situation that should be now addressed really fully, and we need to put violence against women at the top of the UN agenda with systematic inclusion of all mechanisms. And maybe we also need to think about optional protocol to CEDAW on violence against women. Because now I am thinking that what we have tried with General Recommendation 35 to CEDAW on gender-based violence against women, and Feride was chairperson of CEDAW committee when CEDAW committee jointly with my mandate developed general recommendation number 35 on gender-based violence against women, that is basically trying to be what Istanbul Convention is at the regional level, to have it at the national level. But it was not promoted, it was not supported by the UN Women and UN system. So whenever I travel to other countries, there is no knowledge about GR35. So we need to somehow think what should be the next step. So maybe the next step should be really to see if optional protocol to CEDAW on violence against women could be this universalization of the Istanbul Convention, because what is in Istanbul Convention is really needed at the global level.
Yeah. So what you say is basically, first of all, that these attacks have exposed previously existing weaknesses in the whole infrastructure on gender equality,
Yes.
such as that CSW does not look at violence against women every year, and that there has been a diminishing support from women and feminist movements since Beijing. If we look on a longer time, then for sure you can say that. Feride, what would you like to add concerning the?
Well, on one level, I am more optimistic than Dubravka is, and another level, I am perhaps more pessimistic. When it comes to the international level at this particular point in time, I am not, to be honest, very optimistic. So things like having a new, even an optional protocol to CEDAW on violence against women, I mean, to me, looks like it's dangerous ground to move the agenda into, because there is so much, I mean, on the international level, the political positions of many states is really so conservative now, and there are so many very high-pitched voices being heard from relatively undemocratic regimes, in other words, the populist and democratic regimes, that it really is a dangerous time to push for an agenda like this, I think. I'm not saying that we should take it off the floor altogether, but we should progress with very small and careful steps so that we don't fall face first on the ground. But on the other hand, I think locally speaking or nationally speaking, there is quite a bit of response, despite all the disadvantage of being in political spaces where civil society activism is more and more constrained in many countries. Women's movements are really pushing for these things on the national and local level. In my own country, in Turkey, for instance, when the government started talking about a few months ago about withdrawing from the convention that is called the Istanbul Convention, for heaven's sake, and a convention that was very much promoted and by the same government, not so long ago, when they started talking about withdrawing, the possibility of withdrawing from that, coming from the on the basis of the pressure from the more conservative groups that and in the atmosphere of this populist politics, it was the women's groups, the feminist groups, the women's groups that really started a very strong movement, civil rights movement. And for the first time for instance, in my own life, I've seen so many separate women's groups really converging on this idea of protecting the Istanbul Convention. And it included actually women from the conservative side too, women who were part of the ruling party. They were also against the withdrawal. So there is a basis there that, and now in the more recent past, these groups in Turkey have also organized some seminars and a common declaration with similar working groups from Croatia, from Bulgaria, from from Hungary, from Eastern European and Balkan states, and there is something moving there. So I really think this time it is encouraging to see that, and rather than work on new international norms at the international level at this point, I think we need to work more on connecting the national with the international. That would be my, with the existing international.
Yeah.
There's just one point, but in Turkey we do have Istanbul Convention. For many countries we do not have Istanbul Convention. We have only Istanbul Convention. And there is also EU-UN Spotlight Initiative that is spending 500 million euros on elimination of violence against women. You see, and there is also Trust Fund on Violence Against Women, but there is no clear roadmap how they are doing it, what they are doing, and so on. And from this global perspective, I think that when we are looking at Istanbul Convention and Council of Europe states, we do have a clear roadmap here. But for the rest of the world, they need to go to CEDAW interpretation that was done by CEDAW, different cases and so on. And basically I'm saying it's there, it's under the CEDAW also, but it should be more clear. It is in General Recommendation 35, but it should be promoted, it should be explained, it should be there. And just to mention, for example, in Croatia, we had professor of Zagreb Law School who published a book against the Istanbul Convention. So you see, book that was published for students or, I don't know, academicians, saying that Gravio is endangering sovereignty of Croatia if Croatia is going to ratify and so on. And at the same time, we have treaty bodies that are examining human rights situation and so on. And somehow, because there is no sufficient knowledge for general population on those points, that was repeated by others. So it was a huge surprise for me when my brother was asking me, so what is in Istanbul Convention about toilets? And then I was thinking, what's going on in this world? So many misinterpretation in newspapers and so on. So I think we need strong action from journalists, from academicians, from parliamentarians, from governmental officials that will really explain the full content of Istanbul Convention. And then this is push in the right direction. So that should be done at the regional level, but also at the global level.
Yeah. Okay. I think we clearly see that we have two women here that have always not just critiqued society as it was, but tried to improve it and try to get into action, no? Because my next question would have been what should we do now? But you've both already addressed, yeah, I'll give you a second. You both already addressed all sorts of actions that can be taken. And I think while it's also clear that the overall political opportunities at the moment for women's rights and feminist issues altogether are bad because of many regimes that clearly embrace very different values. What Feride was saying was that in the background of this, there is also a renewed mobilization of women on behalf of feminist issues and, for instance, on violence against women in Turkey, when they tried to, or said that maybe they should withdraw from the Istanbul Convention. And there is an increased international exchange of ideas with other people from countries that experience attacks to see what they could do. Then on the other hand, Dubravka is reminding us that Istanbul Convention is only relevant for a limited number of countries, and the world is much larger than that. Oh, yeah. And there is still a lot needed to be done on that level, because it should be expanded or incorporated in other conventions, because it has so many good ideas within it. And Dubravka also came back to her point made at the beginning, that it remains important to inform the general public what exactly is in the Istanbul Convention, to try and find all the misinformation that is part of the attacks against it. So there's an urgency, obviously, both even if there weren't any attacks. Dubravka would say there is still an urgency because the Istanbul Convention, you know, is not relevant in too many countries in the world. But the attacks add a strong sense of urgency to that. But of course, also Dubravka, when I heard you say that the journalists need to do something, and the parliamentarians and the government officials and the people and the feminists and the researchers, and I mean, you included everyone, I think, and probably would include even more, but that seems a bit like too much. So if we have to prioritize how to deal with these attacks and see how can we turn around this negative spiral of events, where should we start? And what can different people do? So I'm assuming, I don't know, that the people who listen to this seminar, they might be researchers or people working in academia. They might be activists working on violence against women. They might be active in one role or another as politicians or government officials or journalists. So what is most urgent? What is the different role that these people can have, and what would you choose from all the different things that need to be done, given that people have only one life and they cannot travel at the moment, but they can do many other things. So Dubravka, what would you tell them to do?
I think that we really need to also look at the country context. For example, I have visited Bulgaria as Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, and I have seen how Istanbul Convention's ratification was stopped by a decision done by the Constitutional Court in a process of ratification during discussions that had this type of discussions pro and against. It was decided to turn to Constitutional Court, and Constitutional Court was then analyzing compatibility of the Constitution and content of Istanbul Convention, and unfortunately they came up with conclusion that Istanbul Convention is not compatible or in line with Bulgarian Constitution. And then when I was looking what happened, what was done, what was the main argument there? First, translation of Istanbul Convention into Bulgarian language was done completely differently than other translations with respect to term gender. It was very uniquely translated. For example, this is what I'm seeing now in Eastern European countries. Term gender was not used per se. It was sex that was used. And it was under sex, gender was integrated, but it was not separated. And in Bulgaria, for all instruments, when they translated gender-based violence, they didn't use term gender translated into gender, everything was sex. And then for Istanbul Convention, because there is a specific article in which there is sex and gender discrimination, they are together, suddenly they included new kind of translation of term gender that was like something else, something different. And then this was used by all those conservative forces to say, oh, this is new concept, this is not in line with our traditions, our cultures, our everything, and so on. And then this misuse was then interpreted that this is new concept that is not in line what is already in other instruments and so on. And in the same time, Bulgaria has EU directives related to protection of victims of violence that also use term gender, that are used in translation as sex without any problems in Bulgaria. So, and then also Constitutional Court did not use international treaties ratified by Bulgaria, CEDAW Convention and others. So what should be done in cases like this?
Yeah.
You have asked who should do what? From each level of life should go into arguments that are close to that specific group. Parliamentarians, academicians, all groups of persons that are involved in specific issues, they should confront specific arguments by their knowledge in order to say what is in Istanbul Convention and what is not. And this is something what is needed.
Yeah, so you argue very strongly for a particular localized strategy always, because it's always going to be having...
It should be mixture. It should be mixture. And also we need to use international treaties to say it's already in CEDAW, it's already in a global framework. So there is nothing so new in Istanbul Convention. So there is no need to go in the direction of rejecting it.
Okay, Farida, you can see what you add to that, and then I will open the floor for general discussion.
I'd only like to say something about who should be involved in this defense or in this sort of, furthering of the agenda. I think clearly the feminists are out there, and they will be out there for, and we see good examples of that a rejuvenation of the feminist sort of agenda and energy because of this. But I really, I'm going to say something very conventional now. I think that women, feminists and women, should look for alliances with reasonable men's groups. Nothing is going to change, especially now with the kind of world general political conjecture that we have, with many, I would say, populist regimes gaining grounds and moving away from moving away from democratic practices and shrinking the civil society space. This is where I think it's a danger for everyone. So women's and men's groups, mixed groups, should be involved in this. And I think this is something that needs to be emphasized more now on the agenda of perhaps the women's group C too. And I mean, I've never liked this idea, this argument that we have to fight against violence against women because it's too expensive for societies. But it is true. I mean, it is expensive, it is economically. So we have to get societies to understand that it is politically and economically expedient and absolutely necessary to be effective in the fight against violence against women. I think this is a time when we need to bring together different forces, even if the original ideas or bases were different from one another. Also, the pandemic, I think, provides an example, an opportunity in a way here, because violence against women has, so to speak, picked up, according to many studies in many countries. Now it is becoming more obvious to people who haven't thought about it before so much, and this gives a possibility to bring in alliances. And I just want to add one more thing. It is also true that during the pandemic, the world has seen the success, the relative success of women leaders, women political leaders, like in New Zealand or in some of the European countries. And so this is demonstrable fact that gender equality and promotion of women's leadership is really good for society. And so that I think can be an effective tool that we can use to mobilize more people and get them into on the national level and on the international level too, because the arguments, the controversy has been moving away from human rights arguments, unfortunately.
Yeah. I think this is the time when I will. I'm looking at the chat to see what questions resonate with. Would be a nice transition from this discussion that we have so far. And this is an early question from Sena Kimas to everyone, which reads, one of the strategies of the anti-gender movement seems to be co-opting and misusing the human rights language as well. So what would be the best way to react against it? Ignoring seems to make them stronger. Leaving the human rights language is a loss of our hard-won rights. What would be your suggestions? So I think underneath that is also the fact that we maybe need to distinguish between a lack of information about what is in the Istanbul Convention and a lack of proper translation, even maybe in some cases, with leading to misunderstandings. But we need to distinguish that from deliberate misunderstandings that are just trying to co-opt and abuse the Istanbul Convention for a straightforward anti-gender or anti-human rights approach. So what can we do to somehow avoid the chances of such co-optation? I think, Dubravka, maybe you...
I think that it is extremely important to use human rights framework and to use human rights language. And human rights framework in this area of violence against women is extremely important because we are seeing that on many occasions there is lack of understanding what is responsibility of state, what is accountability of state with respect to gender-based violence against women done by private persons and done by state officials and so on. So we have to go back to basics, and unfortunately at the UN level now I see more focus on development in general. What is great, SDG agenda is great, but if we look at SDG agenda, there is goal number 5, achieving gender equality and empowerment of women. Those are human rights norms and language that we have in CEDAW Convention. Elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. This is the main thrust of the CEDAW Convention. This is human rights language. Elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls. This is also human rights language, but without state responsibility to provide everything that is needed to address properly elimination of discrimination and violence against women. So I think that we have problem also at the global level because human rights agenda is not prominent as it was before. At the UN level now, they are all speaking about development and costs of violence, not about human rights and state responsibility. So there is a problem there. Then shrinking space for non-governmental organizations. This kind of anti-gender movement that is present, but also there are advancements. So there are advancements on a different level that are showing that that things should and could be changed if we have proper activities, if we have proper support. I would just like to mention that at African level, there is new movement for new African Convention on violence against women. Already there is Maputo Protocol, but it's very weak monitoring mechanism. So now South Africa is trying to push for a new convention, and they have consulted me on one panel. And basically my position is that we need strong mechanism, strong treaty body at African level. Is it going to be Maputo or is it going to be new convention? It does not matter, but it should be stronger at the regional level. It should be stronger at level of Latin American states, because Mesekwi is also very weak, only 2 days, 2 times per year. So it's really not strong mechanism. So we really need to strengthen human rights framework and human rights mechanisms.
Yeah. So this is clear. I think the next question would then bring it back easily to Feride, who also stressed the need for strategic alliances and for strategic framing of, as Dubravka did just now, like also not shy away from mentioning the economic benefits of working on violence against women and the economic bad consequences of having violence. So this is a question which is maybe also very positively formulated, a question from Jajana Cheskova. According to you, what should be the positive narratives defending the convention? And what should be the main elements of arguments in defending it? Feride, maybe you had already made a start with such a positive kind of story, so maybe you can continue with that.
Well, I think the most effective, perhaps, discourse to convince people about the merits of the Istanbul Convention is to explain to the people that this convention is trying to bring together a lot of things, a lot of steps that were already taken in many of our societies, but not necessarily linked together or not necessarily all at the same time. What I'm trying to say is that this convention, by insisting that there should be not only prevention, not only protection, not only prosecution, but also an integrated policy response, an integrated policy framework in order to combat violence against women. And so we need to explain to people, and they should understand that part of the problem is because there is the responses, the existing responses are uncoordinated, and what one hand does, the other hand doesn't follow up on, or doesn't really develop. There's institutional, intra-institutional collaboration at the between the police and the courts and the health system and the education system. These all need to be linked together, and this is what the Istanbul Convention is asking for. It's the fourth leg of that, it's the fourth P of the famous 4 Ps, and this is, I don't think people really think about that very much. Also, that the Istanbul Convention insists, because it tries to get an integrated response and an effective response, it also talks about, or wants, empowerment of women. In other words, it wants women not to be discriminated against in any part of their social, economic, whatever existence. So it's not a very narrow focused convention, but that it's actually addressing a bigger sort of framework. And so when we talk about these kinds of issues, I have found that in my own experience, that people start reacting to it more positively than when you only speak about things that are being attacked on. Yeah. We should not only concentrate, and in other words, we should not let the attackers determine the agenda.
Yes. Oh, that's a wonderful closing sentence of that argument. And I have 2 more questions that I would like to ask. So they will need to have very brief answers. So I will give the first to Dubravka, and then the last one again to Firide. There is a long question from Tatiana Gardner that I will summarize. And she's worried that now that gender equality sometimes lead to the uses in, I think, official language of parent 1 and parent 2 to be inclusive of all sorts of families, or in German, the word individual with a uterus as a replacement for women. This person is worried that statistics about violence against women would be unavailable if we move to all such kind of language. And so I think this resonates partly with what some of the attackers on the Istanbul Convention are saying that it says. So maybe Dubravka, you can give some kind of reply to Tatiana.
When I started with this mandate, immediately I have called all states to establish a femicide watch, and then term femicide was also objected by many states. So in order to have a good terminology, it is good to see what is happening in other parts of the world, and all states are using term homicide. So they could use homicide, they could use femicide, but it's important to have on each intentional killing a relationship between victim and perpetrator, and if it is intimate partner relationship, then we are having category of intimate partner violence. In this category, we can call it femicide, gender-related killings, homicides of women, in intimate partner context. Out of 10 persons killed, more than 8 are women. So this is very clear. And for that reason, we need to have good collection of comparable statistical data that is administrative data. Up to now, focus was on prevalence data. And I now see that administrative statistical data is really having huge potential to measure each year what is going on in different countries, because now there's they are saying the highest number of femicides are in Latin America. UNODC is showing that highest number of femicides are in African countries. So how do we compare? What are data? What is? I have received data from Germany. So there are now femicide watches in Germany, but it should be governmental obligation to have clear data on intentional killings of women under categories of intimate partner killings, family-related killings, killings, and third category is without this relationship, but that is gender-based killings. And then we will have comparable data that will show what is really level of femicides and other types of violence. For example, just for pluses for Istanbul Convention, there is no unified definition of rape at the international level. Istanbul Convention is the first treaty that is really saying that rape should be based on lack of consent, and what is there? It's first international human rights definition of rape. There is no such definition at international level. When I'm traveling to countries, there are no standards for shelters. There is no kind of clear how the shelter should be established. Protection orders are generally inefficient. They are not there. They are very weak. Risk assessment is not there. Risk assessment is in Istanbul Convention. So there are many positive things in Istanbul Convention that are now also integrated under the CEDAW Convention through case law and through different general recommendations. So we could not say that it's not there, but it's not very visible. So we need to somehow use all those new areas to explain to states what are those steps that needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you. And there is a last question to Ferida, and it's, I think it can be answered very shortly. It's a very precise question from Galina Naleva. Do you think Grevio should engage more actively with the European Court of Human Rights to disseminate information about domestic violence related cases, both at the European and the domestic level?
Clearly, of course I do, and I think there are efforts made in that direction. Grevio had started making contact with the European Court of Human Rights, and even in its very early years when I was still a member and chair of the committee, and the European Court of Human Rights, like many courts actually, is also. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I can say this very freely, I think. Sometimes lawyers and courts are very resistant to being flexible and to looking into this and that, and they would rather only stick to what is in the written law that is in front of them, which is what they should do, of course, primarily, but they should also keep an eye open to what's going on in the rest of the world. And it's in that sense that the Istanbul Convention, being a Council of Europe convention, a human rights convention, is certainly, I would think, within the purview of the European Court of Human Rights. And I think in time, the European Court of Human Rights will look more and more into the Istanbul Convention and into the treatment of the issues with by Grevio. And Grevio is doing its best, I'm sure, to make this sooner than later. And in fact, I even have a particular subject in mind that I think will be the first case that European Court will be taking Grevio, I mean the Istanbul Convention and Grevio's interpretations into perspective there. It's these cases of violence against women in cases of in divorce cases, when custody is being determined, and to take into account the previous violence history of the parents and what this means for women, violence against women. There are many cases to this effect that are reported to Grevio, and Grevio's reports include this kind of matter in some of the country reports where this came up. And I think the issue is also Grevio's perspective is going to also shed light, already started shedding light on the European Court of Human Rights, I would think. Yeah. It will just take a little more time to formalize it.
Yeah, but I think it was informative. It's very difficult as a chair to ask you to stop, because whenever one of you answers, I want you to go longer. But unfortunately, we've reached the end of this part of the webinar, and I must say I'm really happy with the discussions we had. I think there is something in there for both specialists and newcomers in this field. There is a lot more to be discussed. So we will come back with the second part of this seminar at 1:45. And so for now we have a 10-minute break. Then Andrea Krizsan and Conny Roggeband will tell us more about their book and their detailed investigations about 4 countries in the east of Europe and attacks on the Istanbul Convention. And I'm sure that will also be a terrific part of the seminar. I've had a short chance now to look at the participants, and I see people from across the ocean, from all sorts of parts of Europe. And as far as I know them, I sometimes know where they are. And also many people whose name is not known to me, but I wish you all the best of luck in further discussing this in wherever you are, and in trying to make better things happen for the world. For now, we have a short break, so I'll see you back at 1:45. Okay, welcome everyone for the second part of this webinar. We now have 2 distinguished scholars that have done a lot of research on violence against women already, and that I have worked with in the past also to a great extent. Those are Andrea Krizsan and Conny Roggeband. What I want to say about them is just very brief. I think they're both very prolific and very widely oriented feminist scholars that always tackle very difficult topics in their work. And Andrea Krizsan from Central European University in Budapest, associate professor there at the School of Public Policy, but also a research fellow at the Center for Policy Studies. And she comes from anti-discrimination and minority protection background, but she's been contributed to an amazing set of comparative research on gender and intersectionality in East and Central Europe and at the European level. And she's been one of the very visible people that unfortunately have to have this ungrateful task of pointing out the unwillingness of Western European scholars to understand the Europe behind the small part of Western European countries. And she's very positive and creative, innovative scholar. And what she's doing right now with Conny Roggeband is working on this book on the attacks on the Istanbul Convention. And with Conny, she has also presented a background paper last year at the CSW, the UN Commission on the Status of Women in New York. So also engaging with where public policy is made. And Conny Roggeband is at the University of Amsterdam, associate professor in public policy and governance. She's written on the politicization of gender-based violence, but also on gender mainstreaming and equality policies. Well-recognized scholar also on social movements and social movement theory, and on transnational feminist networking. So you see the wide range of, she's based in the Netherlands, but has not always been based there. She's lived in Spain and other countries in Latin America as well, Nicaragua and Ecuador especially. And she works on the implications of democratic backsliding for gender equality, and also on processes of transnational policy diffusion. And this first one is, of course, where she collaborates very strongly and intensively with Andrea Krizsan, and how they all do that in the context of COVID, I don't know, but they managed to do that very productively. And I will give the floor to you. I don't know who of you will start. I think you will largely manage the discussion also with the 2 of you. And I will only jump in if I think that there will be a problem with the time or something like that. So we will be a largely technical role, and you can start.
Thank you very much, Mieke. Thank you for this very kind introduction, and thank you for all of you being with us on this moment where we want to talk about our book. So yes, we have been working on this for some time, on the pushback against the Istanbul Convention book. I think it kept us going during its COVID times because it is a fascinating story, although as we talked about before the break, it's also quite worrisome. So we are working on this book project, and we will present you some of the preliminary results. We hope it will come out next year. But the book is a comparison of 4 countries in Central Eastern Europe. It's Bulgaria, Croatia, Hungary, and Poland. In which all of these countries, there's been quite a strong pushback against the Istanbul Convention. Yeah, different stories happened there, and this is the focus of our book. So we had an interesting puzzle, right, Andrea?
Yeah, so thank you, Conny, and thank you for the very nice generous introduction, Mika, and thank you, Dubravka and Feride, for being here with us. It's really an honor, and I think we can say that your discussion was very inspiring, and it told us that we are not altogether on the wrong direction with our book. So I hope you will also find some resonance with our findings. So just a few words about the story of our book, where we come from, and I think that also resonates with some of the stuff that you were saying. So violence against women is such an interesting field, and it's basically a relative success field in the region, in the Central and Eastern European region, and somewhat controversial, but overall, if you look in terms of policy impact, then a lot of policies have been developed in most of these countries. But what is interesting about these debates and about the outcomes, the policy outcomes, is that you look more closely, then hardly there is any gender in these debates, and hardly there is any words. I mean, certainly no gender at all in policies, but also no discussion about women's rights and gender equality in the debates that went on around these policies. So our previous book, basically, which covered all 4 of these countries, and another one, a 5th one, Romania, which we are not covering right now. So we found that there was really so little gender, and then compared to that, then all the discussion about, all the debate around the Istanbul Convention around gender, it was such a surprise. And it was, we must say, and this is basically the story of the book, that we were on the one hand very surprised, on the other hand we were a little bit also maybe happy, because we were saying, now finally we are talking about the right thing, right? So we never addressed gender inequality so far, so now we need to really talk about this, and this politicization of gender made us in many ways optimistic, we must say. So optimistic in terms of how this could, on the one hand, possibly bring more awareness about the issue of gender related to violence against women, and about the possibly bring more actors talk about the gendered aspects of this issue, and change the frames. And so we wanted to understand what this politicization of gender in this particular field brings, on the one hand, to movements, to women's movements and their activism and their constituencies. And on the other hand, we also wanted, and we were hoping to see, based on the literature, more gender in policies, to see more gender equality coming into the policies that result from this convention. But then, as the deeper we went into the research, it turned out that, well, surely there is politicization, surely there is a lot of changes, and maybe, yes, indeed, some aspect, some reason for some optimism as well. But there are certainly some limitations, serious limitations here, and so also some serious backdraws on this kind of politicization. So I pass the word to you, Conny, to start the discussion about the
book's contribution.
Yes,
because we initially didn't plan to write a book on this. We started with a paper because we were fascinated by the story around the Istanbul Convention and all this politicization. And then we started to work on it, and then, well, we think there is a book in it, and there will be a book in it, because we think it's such an interesting lens to look at many things. First, and that's been mentioned before the break, is also the war on gender. So this whole anti-gender mobilization, that's one thing, and there's been a lot of debate about it. There's also a lot of very good research about it, but in that there was very little attention to this particular issue on violence against women and the pushback against the Istanbul Convention. So that was somewhat missing, and we thought, oh, it would be interesting not just to look at these attacks and what they are about, but also to compare their impact. So what is the result? What are the implications of all this contention? What is the impact on women's rights organization? What's the impact on policy, violence against women policies in these countries? So what's happening? And next, the other thing was that we thought, oh, this is also a very interesting lens to look at democratic backsliding, because that's been another topic that we both have been working on, and it's ongoing in the region. Unfortunately, not only in the region, it's again a global phenomenon. And we think violence against women in this is also a very important topic, because violence against women prevents women to participate equally in society. It privatizes women, it pushes them back out of the public sphere and the political sphere. But also, if we look, and we come back to that later, that the tools that the opponents use, democracy is very important in that. We also see that it's actually now also taken up as a democracy issue. So it's bringing also groups on the issue of violence against women, not because they were previously interested in violence against women, but basically because they see it now as a democracy issue, and they are pro-democracy actors, and they take it up as part of their pro-democracy struggle. And another point is that we see what's happening through this pushback to the civic space, and the space where women's organizations and human rights organizations are mobilizing, is very problematic, and it has deep democratic implications.
Okay, so what do we want to tell you here? We obviously will not be able to present the whole book, and we are not fully done with it. But just just kind of teasers, and these would come in three fields. So first, we want to talk a little bit about the opponents and their strategies. That's the place where there is most extensive literature, and we feel we can contribute to it, but not only to that. So the other two aspects we want to talk about is what does this contestation do to violence against women activism and the field of activism, a field of the policy field. Like the actors that are involved in the policy field. And the third aspect we want to talk about is the policies and what this has done to policies on violence against women. Okay, so let's start with the question, who opposes the Istanbul Convention, how and why? And so we, first of all, just to mention, so there is a surprise element in a way in how this whole thing erupted around the Istanbul Convention. The tradition here is that, especially in the region, is that international treaties are read, looked at technocratically, and signed and ratified, and nobody is aware about what is in those treaties. And in that sense, this is how it looked like initially, also with the convention in 3 of the 4 countries, basically. So with the exception of Poland, everything went on smoothly without any debate, without any much discussion about the gender aspects, and which is particularly interesting in Croatia, in the sense that the war on gender was going on already in Croatia at the time when the Istanbul Convention signature took place, and still it didn't connect yet, but it came much later. And so it was an element of surprise, and we looked at these discussions in these terms as well. So we wanted to see when these erupt, and who exactly are these people who are starting to all of a sudden talk about violence against women in these negative terms. So the actors, as we looked at them, so we see from the literature the lineup of these actors, and this is very much the same actors in our cases as well. We see churches, we see civil society, religious civil society. We see think tanks. That's a very interesting think tanks and experts, legal experts mainly. But we also see governments, illiberal governments. And what is interesting from the point of view of violence against women, that many of these actors have never engaged in violence against women. So they come on board and discuss the issue as kind of new actors. And this is in a way common for all of the countries. What is distinctive though, and then a little different for the different countries, is the trajectories that we see for how the contestation started. We see kind of different trajectories, and also different dominance of certain actors in the four fields. So as Conny mentioned, we have Bulgaria, Croatia, Poland, and Hungary here. And what is interesting for Croatia is that the debate on gender has started much earlier. So basically the Istanbul Convention debate is an add-on to the movement, which has already been chewing by that time on the definition of family, on sexual education, and so on. So it was a very consolidated movement. And then comes also Istanbul Convention on its agenda. But in the three other countries, interestingly also in Poland, this is starting, the whole thing is starting with the Istanbul Convention. So several researchers know that the attack on Istanbul Convention was the start of the war on gender in Poland, even though there was a lot of discussion about reproductive rights and other issues, but this gender ideology and all these things only started with the Istanbul Convention. And it's a brand new thing in both Hungary and Bulgaria, which have never had discussion about gender equality publicly. So it's very, very pushed down. And so this is a very different trajectories, and also the dominance of actors is different. Just very shortly to mention, what we see is very extensive and well-nurtured civil society in Croatia. That's a very and even though this is connected to the church, to the Catholic Church, but it's still, this is civil society actors which are dominant there. And contrary to this, you see in Poland some civil society actors, but the church dominance and speaking up publicly as an actor constantly on the Istanbul Convention as the main voice, that's very, very clear and very different from the other countries. And in Hungary, you see yet another pattern. It's a very statist kind of set of actors. It's true that civil society starts, but what is interesting is that these are all civil society organizations and think tanks that were created by the state just about a year before. So it's like brand new organizations which then take up and then become almost like a common platform with the state. Okay, so Conny, I pass on the word to you to talk a little bit about how these guys are acting actually.
Exactly, yeah, because that was really, again, something that was quite fascinating to us. And because what we are seeing is that they are using a lot of what we call pseudo-democratic tools. All kinds of mobilization strategy, using all kinds of democratic strategies like signing petitions, asking for referenda. They are making this kind of populist use of democracy arguments. They are appealing to the majority, saying to the right of the majority to being heard on this topic and to defend themselves. But we also see, and already Andrea mentioned this role of think tanks and the role of expertise. So they're claiming and also producing a lot of expertise on the topic, not so much on violence against women, but more like a legal expertise on it. And as the story of Bulgaria, they even goes for that this constitution, the Istanbul Convention, is taken to the Constitutional Court. So that was really, so this kind of quite formal, conventional mobilizing strategies with a lot of appeal to democracy. But at the same time, we also see that there's these actors are slowly but very firmly infiltrating the state, in a way capturing state power. So they, in some countries like in Croatia, they take up a role in consultation. So they are consultant, for instance, on the ratification process. They have a say in it. But they also, in other countries, take up quite important power positions. So these opponents to the Istanbul Conventions are named in important political positions in some countries. At the same time, we also see them using like more grassroots kind of actions, so also street protests. And there we see the importance of the church, and particularly church infrastructures. So the Catholic Church, but in Bulgaria, the Orthodox churches, those infrastructures are used to mobilize people and to create mass, so to say, numbers. And at first we were so almost fascinated, blinded by this predominant use of all kinds of pseudo-democratic tools that there's also this very other side to it, and that's the much more grim part of this strategies, which is quite violent. So we see all kinds of smear campaigns in the media, and that's been mentioned before, not just all kind of negative information about the Istanbul Convention, but also about the promoters of the Istanbul Convention, so women's rights organizations, but also Grevio is vilified and put in a very negative daylight, or any actor that promotes the Istanbul Convention is made a topic of smear campaigns. But we also see that we've seen in Poland, like police attacks, raids, excessive monitoring. We've seen intimidation of women's rights organizations, blacklisted in government media, these organizations, forms of state persecution. So we see all kinds of really violent forms of attacks on both the Istanbul Convention, but also particularly to the promoters of the Istanbul Convention. And in a way, you could say this is linked to the framing they use against the Istanbul Convention.
So we identify two main groups of frames. Of course, there's a lot in there, but there's not really space to discuss it. One part of it is related to gender. The other one is this national sovereignty thing. I think either Feride or Dubravka mentioned. So about the gender equality thing. So as I mentioned at the beginning already, we basically see a paradigm change in talking about violence against women and problematizing the gender equality components here. So there is one more legalistic way to do this, and there is another one which is more about culture and history and social norms. So the more legalistic discussion of this we see, and Conny, maybe you want to put the quote that we have here. So the more legalistic discussion says, well, gender is a very problematic legal category, and it's leading to legal uncertainty because it's basically blurring the boundary, blurring the dichotomous category of women and men, and as such it is making legal categorization very problematic and difficult. And so this is one set of frames which is very legalistic, very neutral, and it has to do with the definition of gender or it is assumed to have a definition have a connection with the definition in the convention, and I agree there that is incorrect the way it is interpreted, but that doesn't matter here. The other thing that they say is, and that's a really interesting twist here, is really to the core of the convention, and this is not a misinterpretation of the convention. This is about the transformative character of the convention. So it's a very direct attack on how the Istanbul Convention is now not anymore just discussing violence against women, but it actually wants to intervene in this subordination of women, in this this gender inequality aspect that stands behind violence, and which is the very innovative nature of the Istanbul Convention. So, and the way to see this is in looking at these frames and seeing how they very clearly separate violence against women, which they problematize and they accept as an issue to be addressed and to be combated, whereas transformation that comes with it and addressing the root of the problem, that is social transformation, which is coming through basically education, awareness raising, but also through including civil society, women's rights organizations in implementing the convention. These are all transformative elements which they problematize. So that's a very, very, very interesting finding. We believe it's also interesting how they discuss, and this goes back to some Catholic Church framing on violence already back at the Beijing conference, on how women as different are okay to be protected. Women are not, but it's the problem really is intervening in the hierarchy between women and men. So that much, I mean, there's a lot more, but there is not enough space to discuss here. The thing on national sovereignty is, of course, a lot connected, but in a way different. So maybe Conny, you want to say a few words about that?
Yes, so the second argument that is brought forward by these anti-gender is that this is basically the Istanbul Convention is this Trojan horse, right? So it is a formal convention, and that sort of suggests that this is about violence against women, but nevertheless, no, this is a dangerous instrument to actually promote and to import gender ideology in this country. So these actors really step up to defend national values and traditions, according to them, and say, well, this is the place where we as countries are demanding sovereignty, and the international organizations shouldn't interfere with our ideas about family, about the role of men and women. So this is really a dangerous imposition. It's a form of cultural colonization, as some argue. So, for instance, here these quotes really show this is how these, because it also points at the enemies of these, the actors that do this. So it's international lobbies that are pushing, to, for instance, here this quote, to legalize a third gender, or again, women's organization or civil society as such are really seen as the core of the problem, because they are promoting these very, like said here, illegal, morally unacceptable and socially destructive things, and they are called, civil society in Croatia here are called the holy cows, because so long they have been given too much prevalence by the government. That's the suggestion here.
Okay. So is it me, Conny?
It's
yeah.
you.
Yeah, okay. So we could talk forever on the attacks, but we would like to also say a few words about the other aspects. The one is what does this do to the women's rights advocates? And what we see here, I mean, as I mentioned at the beginning, in our previous research, we found that there was relative success in this field in terms of policy progress, and what we found in that previous book was that that the most successful patterns of action to achieve success was the best patterns of action to achieve success were one was transactional activism, it's called in the literature, which is working in collaboration and cooperation with various state actors, allies within the state machinery. And that was one pattern that really always was needed for success. The other pattern was diversity of diverse organizational forms within the movement. So not just to have this kind of formalistic organizations which could talk to the government, but also have some kind of a grassroots branch to the movement which could express dissatisfaction when the negotiations with the government could not work. So it was this push and pull with on the one hand negotiating, but when it got blocked, then you also went to the street and made noise this other way. So these two pillars were the elements of success before. Now this with the changed circumstances would not work anymore. So transactional activism done with states which are at least permissive to anti-gender ideology, but in worst case, they also incorporate those anti-gender ideology voices. It makes it basically impossible to use any transactional strategy. So basically this shift in the role in the relationship between states and movement has also led to quite some important changes in movement strategies and rethinking the previous strategies. And we heard Feride already mention some of these, so I think we very much resonate in that. So we see different capacities being mobilized where those were available. So there is quite some serious differences in this between the four countries. It really did matter what kind of state they are facing, and it also mattered what kind of movement they arrived to this moment with? So was it a small and very institutionalized movement, or it was a diverse with multiple organizations and all kinds of capacities? So we see differences in this, but we see also definitely changes in strategies everywhere, though the extent is somewhat different. So maybe Conny, you want to say a little bit about that?
Yes, because there's a lot of difference, but basically we see like two kinds of main responses. At first, the hopeful thing that Frida also talked about before, the kind of reinvigoration of the strong responses of women's rights activists across many countries. And we most recently seen then again in Poland a strong, massive mobilization of women to defend women's rights, actually. And so, yeah, we see quite a strong, more participatory, more confrontative activism. Also to include new actors, so new young feminists come in. So they develop new strategies. There's all kinds of new coalitions going on, interesting things. But also like new coalitions with other more outside actors, particularly with pro-democracy and human rights activism that did not always take up the issue before. And also in some cases, for instance, state actors have been quite important to defend women's rights. So initially in Poland, President Tusk was quite important to push through the ratification. In Croatia, it was President Plenković that played a role there.
Prime ministers, both. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and also, for instance, in Hungary, you see that all the opposition parties to the Fidesz government actually really took up the issue and present the Istanbul Convention really as a democracy issue. So that is very interesting and very hopeful in that sense. But at the same time, and that's where we think it's very specific for the field, the women's the activism on violence against women, because these organizations were so important in developing violence against women policies, taking up a very important role in those policies by developing services, offering legal assistance, all kinds of hotlines, all kinds of services, basically to make up for a non-responsive state. And so since in a way the violence against women policy field is so dependent on them, that also makes them in a way a bit vulnerable to all these attacks, because it also affects very much their services. So what we are seeing is a lot of fear here, also exhaustion, that really impacts on the movement, because all the intimidation really makes, and the raids that have been going on makes them quite afraid. So again, I want to share some quotes here. I'm sorry, this. It's not working. So.
I can do it, Conny.
Yes.
I can do it, Conny. Don't worry.
Yeah. Okay, please. Because I think the quotes of the activists say more than we can say. Because in all of these countries, we have seen that the smear campaigns, the intimidation, the excessive raids really have an impact, make a big toll on these movements, and that activists really feel very intimidated and got far more paranoid. So Andrea is now sharing the screen.
If only I knew how to do it. Yeah, okay, so here you go. Next one, yeah.
And then more further down.
Yeah. Oh, here, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so this is an activist from Hungary that Bulgaria that really talks about how these attacks that come from different places, right, from sometimes through the government, from political parties, but also from the church, really create a lot of fear that they have witnessed all kinds of violence attacks on them, even death threats they talk about, so which makes them often quite fearful. Again here, In Poland, the same thing that we saw, that police raids came in and made the people working in those services really quite afraid. But not only the people working in the services, but also affected the services, because the women that actually use these services are also becoming more afraid because they think, well, maybe the police took away my private information, or they might come in again. So it's really affecting also these services, and we see really this fear has a deep impact. Also, there's we see that more and more there are budget cuts going on, that the services cannot continue as normally. And there, of course, and we talked about it before, is this hatred, so to say, or all these attacks against gender. And so, for instance, some of these organizations have the word gender in their name, and this is one organization in Bulgaria that has the word gender in its name, and it's really making them more afraid to actually use that name and go out and make themselves visible. So they say here, well, we don't use our full names anymore, we just use the abbreviation. So we see all kinds of coping strategies to really find a way around all this aggression against them and still keep on doing what they are doing, and that is offering protection and help to women that are dealing with situations of violence.
Okay. And just a few thoughts on the policy implications as well from here. Of course, we could talk much more about the women's movement as well, but we need to stop here. So a little bit about the policy implications. Now, this was, again, another surprising set of findings here. Initially, at first look, the surprise came because in the literature, it tells you that there is politicization, then there's going to be more responses, so that the politicization of issues forces policymakers to make decisions pro or against, but it's more difficult for them to stay neutral if an issue is politicized. But rather than finding a lot more gender, what we found though was a lot of policy changes, basically, on the one hand. So we would have expected that all the debate has maybe, especially in the countries which refused outright to ratify the convention, that they wouldn't do any more changes. But yet you still see a lot of new legislation coming in, a lot of new legislation, new policies in the field, and also that's very, very interesting, a lot of more services. So all of these countries can account for more services now in their reports, more shelters, and also more budget, which at first sight was really, really surprising. And of course, we knew about the need to transpose EU legislation, which all of these countries had to, and there was some relevant EU legislation here. But still it was kind of a surprise at first, but then we started looking more deeply what these changes mean, and then that's where you see some of the problems that emerge here. So we need to recognize there is some progress in policies, but yet, like, I would like to say a few words about the text of the policies. So what we found is that a lot of these policies are geared towards criminalization. So you see a lot of changes in criminal codes, in criminal procedures, protocols for police, so on the criminal part, not so much on the other parts. And where you have more comprehensive pieces of legislation, their framing might end up rather problematic, actually. So you have some new strategies on domestic violence, for instance, in Hungary, which are rather problematic. So they deal with the issue as a family protection issue, and though they recognize women may be victims, but then at the end of the day, all they want to do is save the family. So you have changes, but these changes need to be scrutinized carefully and checked for what actually they do. And some pieces, actually, in Poland, for instance, the pedophilia law are outright against gender equality, so they are openly anti-gender equality. And then, Conny, you tell a few words about the services as well, which is also a very interesting finding.
Yeah, because in a way we see that this whole debate shifts the whole policy field in a way, and in a way we think it's almost like a violent takeover, because it's really an appropriation of the policy field. Because a lot of the services that were previously mostly offered by women's rights organizations, we see now the creation of a lot of new alternative services by these anti-gender actors and the hostile state. So what happened is that there's a much more EU money available now for violence against women. More than ever before came from national governments, and this money does not go to the existing services and all the work that's to all the women's organizations that already have so much service in place, but it's really used this money to set up alternative competing services. So we see a replacement basically of existing women's rights services, violence against women services. We see a replacement of the expertise that have been built up by these organizations. And so it's alternative services and alternative experts stepping in, taking over the field and basically destroying, we think, the existing infrastructure and all the effective instruments that have been developed before, all these kinds of protocols, special trainings for police, all the things that have been developed before. Effective instruments are now basically discontinued and destroyed in a way.
And replaced, I think. That's
replaced, very much replaced.
So that in the reports, they then can report that there is more. So more people are serviced, more people are trained, there's more shelters, more crisis centers, and there is a lot more money being spent, which has to do partly with huge EU budgets coming this way on violence against women, which was not the case before. So now this is a rich field, contrary to what it was before.
Yeah. So on paper, it appears also to look very good, because there are indeed then more services and so on, but they are offered by these alternative services. And women's rights organizations and violence against women's experts, which were previously included often in policy processes, they were asked to participate, to give their view on these policies, or they were involved in the implementation and execution of these policies. They now are basically excluded from the policy. And that brings us to the final things, like how to make sense of all of this, right? What are the kind of key takeaways from this book? So we are still making sense of this, but maybe Andrea, you could say something about our first ideas.
Just a few thoughts. So some of the literature discusses the Istanbul Convention as a causality of the war on gender, as if it was not really related, but it just falls to it. And we would like to challenge that argument. We would like to really say that these attacks on the Istanbul Convention have a lot to do with the very core of the convention and the innovative message about gender transformation, and the fact that the convention brings back something that got lost in the process of making policies on violence against women. So initially, these policies were all advocated for by feminists, and they were very much related to gender equality. But then the process brought policies which were ultimately not connected to gender equality. And the convention tells, well, you have to make that connection. You have to do interventions in ways that are gender sensitive. So if we look carefully, first, the attackers are in a way right. Yes, we do want transformation. We want, in the convention wants transformation. It wants to transform the family as a site of violence. It wants to transform the gender inequality that is behind that traditional family model inequality, that is behind that traditional gender equality, traditional family model, and it wants to change people's attitudes about gender and gender or about women and gender inequality. So I think they are right, and I think in that we also have to accept that that's what the convention wants to do, and that has to do with why it is so hardly debated, and this fits perfectly well with the idea that well, women are as victims are acceptable. So it's okay for a woman to be different. It's okay for a woman to be helped. It's okay to be a victim, but it's not okay to be equal. So I think that's a very important tension that is here. And I think what we find in our analysis is substantiating that kind of message in this contestation. And then there is another message about democracy that we have.
Yes, and this is really that we think this adds really to the whole debate about democratic backsliding. And I hope that there are some people working from the mainstream democratic theory and democratic backsliding literature also listen to this. But we really think that this is a very important topic that's so much overlooked. So the whole gendered aspects of these democratic backsliding are so much overlooked, and we think this issue is so important, and particularly the violence against women issue, because we think this is a crucial topic. It's core to democracy because it is really about the bodies of women, and the state does still not offer adequate protection. Instead, it destroys existing infrastructures, and it even makes things worse by bringing these smear campaigns, because this also means threats to individual women. So individual women are not properly protected by the state, not against violence, and even in a way the state brings more violence to women by supporting these kind of smear campaigns to women. And also we think that these Istanbul Convention rhetoric and also the traditional values discourse sends out this message that women are still secondary citizens. So it in a way it brings this tolerance towards violence. And then there's also that we think that it also is important because it affects the democratic procedures, and particularly the representation of women, particularly through women's organizations. So we think that these attacks really curtail women's political representation by limiting the access of women's rights activists and even threatening away them from participation. So all this fear and hatred against them in a way pushes them out of the political sphere, and we think in that sense this is also really a form of violence against women in politics or in civil society. So we think again it has very important implications, and we think it's very important to look at the Istanbul Convention through this lens. And well, there's much more to say, but we leave it here, and we really are eager to hear your comments and discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think Conny and Andrea, maybe you look at the questions and in the chat or in the Q&A and see what you can answer in the time ahead, because there are some interesting questions, I think.
Yes, let's have a look, because I haven't read them yet.
Yeah, me neither. Yeah.
Well, you could start with what I see on my screen as the last one, which is a question from Emma Lombardo about the role of the feminist movement in redemocratizing the public sphere, what you mentioned, and whether you see any potential for other political actors to pick on these important dynamics between democracy and equality in relation to gender-based violence. And you talked about these alliances with pro-democracy activists. So Emma would like to know, what about progressive political parties? Can you expand a bit on this? And I think that goes back to also the point about alliances that was raised with Farida in the first part of the webinar. So, and then in the meantime, maybe those of you, the one of you that doesn't, can look at the other questions and pick one. No?
I can pick this one, Conny,
yeah,
okay?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Emma. Nice to see you here. And well, I think this is a very important question, and I think this is the cause for optimism, basically. So I really like to think of it like that. And we were very cautiously looking at the potential for democratization and for not only democratization, but or pro-democracy fight, but also the potential to gender the concepts of democracy that is being used in these countries through this. So what, and the way we, there was two ways we looked at it, it was like looking at the extent to which by being more inclusive in coalitions, you basically make violence against women and this particular interpretation, gendered interpretation of violence against women, part of a wider democracy agenda. And in that sense, having more actors on board, and especially actors who have not previously been involved with violence against women or gender equality in any sense. And here we are not thinking of any conservative people, but we are basically thinking of mainstream human rights actors who have already been and fighting illiberal states, but never thought of including gender as part of those agendas. So this politicization, painful as it may be for some of the activists, it still gives this kind of potential to widen the constituency and to make this issue at stake in the struggle for illiberal states. You most particularly see this in the two illiberal states, Hungary and Poland, where we have also very interesting quotes from activists seeing how violence all of a sudden is now backed by, or combating violence is backed by a series of actors, and more women realize that they want to engage with this more important or more actively. And then in terms of politicians, what is interesting is we do have, yes, we have data also on political parties, and one prominent example is the one that Conny mentioned, where all parties, so after the 2018 election, which was really the peak of the anti-Istanbul Convention campaign, and by that time it was also a clear agenda point for the government, so not anymore a civil society point, made all opposition parties, including far right, to sign to develop a proposal for a parliamentary decision, which said we need to ratify the Istanbul Convention if we want democracy. That's part of a democratic thinking. If you don't ratify, and it was far right big signing as well to that. So that's an interesting thing. Now you can of course ask whether they really mean it. What do they mean? So what exactly there is behind this? and the same that's a back and forth we have with also some of the people, some of the our interview subjects on whether these lead politicians, like prime ministers in Poland, in progressive Poland, and prime minister in Croatia under ratification, both center-right politicians, very pro-European, of course, but center-right politicians, and they would have otherwise probably not been so outspoken and supportive of violence against women, but this ended up as a new European agenda point, and the ratification seemed to be the breaking point for now being in Europe or not being in Europe. So they ended up very outspoken, and some people think that's cynical and they don't really act upon it. So yes, we ratify, but then do they really mean it? It's difficult to tell. I think this is very difficult issues, but for sure these alliances, even if maybe in politically correct ways, they take things further because their ratifications have happened in these countries at the end of the day. So
yeah, maybe to add to it, because we talked about it before, also a bit before the break, but what we were seeing now that maybe also that for women's organizations or all the pro-IC actors, it's also very important to start acting more transnational and make it also more visible, the transnational linkages, because we see a lot of these women, you know, very active at the national level, where it's obviously the big fight, but I think the transnational would be very important as well, because mainly because I think the opponents are so very transnational, and they're so well organized transnationally. And I saw one of the questions here in the chat about the recent alternative convention that has been promoted from Poland by one of these think tanks that plays a key role in our research, Order Juris. It's a Polish Catholic think tank. It also has now a chapter in Croatia, but even I think also another chapter in Brazil. So there's this real transnational linkages, and they come up with an alternative convention on the rights of the family, which in a way copies many aspects of the Istanbul Convention, but then twists it around and particularly kills the transformative aspect of it. And so they are very well transnational linked. They are very well transnationally mobilized, and I think. So it's really important for us defending the Istanbul Convention to also strike back, and I think we are too much now pushed into this reactive modus, and it's very important to become also in that sense very proactive and maybe making the first strikes. I'm not sure how, and I would really be eager to listen to other people, like any great thoughts on that. But I think that is important too. They are really pushed us very much into these very reactive kind of modus. There's another question I saw that maybe I'm not sure if you can take it up, Andrea, about this rhetoric used by the opponents, whether it's creating more division and fake democracy, the division and the dichotomy in politics, national politics.
Whether that's how it is instrumentalized.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah, it's yeah. I think it, but actually, I think the agenda behind our research in a way is to go beyond that. So to just show that this is not just it's not just the pragmatic politics which wants to create dichotomy and wants to polarize society so that they can win elections. But exactly, I think that's exactly the point we want to make with clarifying how much the attacks are linked fundamentally to gender equality. That's we want to point to how this is more than just political gains. It is really something that has been around for a lot of time, but now it is openly discussed politically. And yes, maybe there is so there I think it may be important that we also connect back to Dubravka's point about misinformation. And yes, I agree, there is a lot and I think we find a lot of misinterpretation and misinformation about the concept of gender, but we also find a lot of very thoroughly argued and thoroughly interpreted stuff in these discourses, which is difficult to say it's incorrect. I honestly think we have to recognize what this project is about. I mean, it is about gender equality, yeah, and not just political gains, yeah.
I have one question.
Yeah.
For Croatia, because I was there all the time during this ratification process, and now it is nice to see outside view of everything that happened in Croatia. And I think that your point on politicization of whole issue is very important, because we are seeing how this politicization is now additional element related to women's rights as human rights, how everything could be at the political level twisted around. But with respect to Croatia, Croatia signed the convention immediately when it was opened for signatures. Then we had left-wing government for I don't know how many years, and it was not on the agenda. It was not important. We had Minister of Foreign Affairs, she was feminist. She was running for post of UN Secretary General, but it was not at the agenda. It was, at that time, it was no anti-gender movement. It was nothing. And then right-wing government, supported by all those conservative forces, they were supporting this government when they got the power. So they were part of the whole process. Then right-wing government decided to ratify, and it was prime minister, and it was attacked from all sides, from his side, not from the left side. So it is politicization that is playing huge role there, and it was completely dangerous situation. Everything could have gone in direction of what happened in Bulgaria, what happened in Slovakia. So the process could have been stopped. So you really need to find a way out. So we have to find strategy for each country that has not yet ratified the Istanbul Convention. What are those key points? And for Bulgaria, now I have this term, gender was translated into social gender. And this is in no other instrument, nowhere else, only in translation of Istanbul Convention. So it is really not correct. So from legal point of view, for all lawyers, for all judges, they have used translation that is not done for similar term in similar instruments already used in Bulgaria. So we need to find a way how to strategize, how to move it from political level to something that is already in CEDAW, in human rights instruments already accepted, in EU instruments already accepted. So I think that there are extremely good important points in your book. It is good that we are analyzing each and every country, but strategy to go out of this and to support positive movements should be more developed, and EU should play much bigger role, much bigger support to non-governmental organizations, to journalists, to academia, to everyone else, because EU should spend more funds for this. I don't see those funds. I don't see the support. I don't see it. It should be there. It should be much stronger.
No, I agree. I think it's very important to think about strategy, but I think, yeah, our book is really much more to map the whole process, because I think that's what we are after. I think this is the place to also think about the political implications and to think what we can do about it, right? Because I think that's and therefore I would be very interested to see, like, what can we do in Bulgaria? Because I mean, with this constitutional engineering, it's blocked, right? So is there any way around it?
Yeah. Very important points. I'm honestly also very puzzled by the EU funding question, because EU money is coming, and the moment it started to come, this field became interesting for government related, all kinds of entrepreneurs and relatives and friends of Orban's and you name it. And basically the whole service sector is taken over by them. So that's not the way then for the EU to finance, right? And there has to be another way, because this is not a solution. This is unintended consequences, basically, of EU funding. That's what happens here. So so that's a very, very tricky thing. And the other thing I maybe want to mention is this politicization. So I find, so honestly, at the beginning, I thought, or we thought, and we talked so much about this, we thought it was so important, and this can only be good. And now, having been through all these interviews and all these discussions, and seeing how some of the more service-oriented groups are really worried for their integrity, but not just that, but they're worried for being able to maintain their services and to go back to the good old normal relation, which was kind of degendered, but it was still servicing victims in ways that was sensitive to gender equality. And now that's under threat, basically. So because they are excluded, because they are demonized, because victims might be afraid to go to an organization which has gender in its name, and so on. You name the kinds of ways. So some of them you sense, not a lot, but we have, not in one place, but in several places, kind of a nostalgia for going back to the previous times when this was not so politicized, but you could negotiate over it. Right now, you have less space to negotiate. And we may agree or not agree with what happens, but this is part of the evidence from the field, and it tells us that politicization brings not just the good things, but also other aspects to this field. So it's very tricky. And this politicization, it's not like in Bulgaria is not, and I'm sure you are aware of that, is not like for Croatia or for Poland, but is out of a nothing, basically a total denial of a problem called gender inequality to an explosion, an unprecedented explosion and discussion of gender equality. Also, they had just a couple of months or almost a year before they had the first ever gender equality law in Bulgaria. So they never had a policy instrument on gender equality. Now in 2016, they passed the law and they set up an institution on gender equality. And then in a couple of months, the conflict over the convention erupted. And so it was all of a sudden, gender was everywhere. Before they would keep on saying, oh no, Bulgaria in Bulgaria, and they would say that in international fora. Maybe you have actually heard Bulgarian representatives say that while Bulgaria doesn't have a gender inequality problem, women are equal in Bulgaria.
Yeah.
Okay.
You know, when I was in Bulgaria speaking to middle level officials in different ministries, they were all supportive for ratification of Istanbul Convention. So now they have to find a way how to, again, have population accepting all those truths about Istanbul Convention after all those misinterpretations. So it is a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah. I think there is one other element that hasn't been mentioned until now. This is the many parallels that are between these attacks on the Istanbul Convention and on gender inequality, and on the word of the use of the concept of gender, with the opposition to sexual equality in Europe. And I think the whole articulation, let's say, of the frame against gender ideology comes from there. And it was readily available to pick it up. So in that sense, I would say that maybe in Bulgaria, it didn't come out, it came all of a sudden when it's about the Istanbul Convention. But the whole narrative of what is wrong with gender came out of this whole opposition to sexual equality, and the Manif pour tous in France, and the articulation by the Vatican about that, and the articulation by the alt-right movement, and the articulation by a number of different groups. So I would think that it would be very productive for this group of people that work on the Istanbul Convention to have an interaction with those people that look very closely at these opponents to sexual equality, because there's many parallels. And there's a very good report, for instance. This is called Modern Day Crusaders in Europe. It's about an organization called Tradition, Family and Property, which is one of these organizations active in the field, and it's by Neil Data, who's from the European Parliamentary Forum for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. And I think that forum has a great many documentations of who are the actors, what are they doing, what is their frame of reference, how they understand gender and gender equality, and why that they don't agree with that, and why, you know, the women need to produce kids for the nations, no? And that are somehow homogeneous. I don't know, all these kind of dreams about the homogeneous nation that are underneath this, and the awful racism underneath this. So I think there is many parallels, and you can see that the people opposing the Istanbul Convention also borrow from what is already been articulated in other places. So it would be very nice to bring these two groups together, and if I can be of any help in doing so, I would happily oblige. So, but of course, this is like, what else can we do in the future? No? I don't know, Conny, and Andrea, are we going to stop?
Yeah, I think so.
Is there some last words that you would like to speak to the people attending?
Thank you for being so patient It's been a very intensive 2 hours, and thank you for the panelists and all the questions, very nice questions. And I think we still work on the book, so we will channel some of the thoughts that came from this discussion definitely in the book. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that Europe should be stronger in supporting Istanbul Convention ratification for remaining countries, and to supporting violence against women in general at the UN level, to have stronger policy on violence against women at the EU level. So there are many things that could and should be done, and I think that this is beginning of the process.
Okay.
Yes, yeah, I also want to thank all the participants, and particularly the panelists, Dubravka, Ferida, and Mieke, for moderating such a nice discussion and participating to it, and all the good questions. And also thanks for the ACES and the Central European University for hosting this event together. So it's I think it's really been important to put the spotlight on the Istanbul Convention. There's much more to say, and I think let's keep the flame going and the struggle, because it's an important piece of work, and yeah, we need to promote it and promote democracy and gender equality together. So thank you.
I'd also like to say that I have really enjoyed and benefited from this interaction. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for holding this. It's also has given hope for the future, I think, because we all need to talk about the way forward, and not only about what has happened, but what we can do what can be done in the future. In that sense, I found this meeting to be very invigorating, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you to all the people that I see on my screen, and all the people that are on the letters as a name in the list of participants. I hope you all go and multiply your actions to bring further a better world for us all. Okay, thank you. We're gonna leave.
Thank you, Mieke.
And,